They saw an old woman, knitting needles in hand. They didn't see the ghost of a spy, ready to unravel their secrets. On her first morning at Redstone Delta, Rachel Moore was stopped in the middle of the field by a sneering sergeant. Looks like a little bunny wandered into the wolves' den. No rank, no name, no introduction. She was treated like an outsider, even threatened to be dragged out by the collar. But just minutes later, when that same sergeant tried a surprise attack, Rachel didn't say a word. She just pivoted, snapped his joint, and forced him to kneel in under 3 seconds. They had thought she was weak for not carrying a weapon, but it was with empty hands that she made an entire special ops camp stand still. Rachel stood there, her black hair tied low, her faded training uniform hanging loose on her small frame. Her face was pale, no makeup, no polish, just those sharp eyes that cut through the morning haze. The other soldiers stared, some with their mouths half open, others shifting their weight like they didn't know what to do with their hands. She didn't gloat, didn't smirk, she just adjusted her stance, brushed a speck of dirt off her sleeve, and waited for the next move. The air felt heavy, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for someone to break the silence. Nobody did, not yet. Hey, if this moment hits you, if you've ever been underestimated or pushed aside, take a second, grab your phone, hit that like button, leave a comment down below, and subscribe to the channel. It means the world to keep sharing stories like this. Stories about people who don't just take it but stand tall. Alright, let's keep going. The sergeant, a weary guy named Walker with a buzzet and a permanent scowl, was still on his knees, clutching his wrist. His face was red, not from pain, but from embarrassment. Around him, the Alpha Viper unit, 317 men, all muscle and ego, stood in a loose circle on the training field. A young recruit, barely 20 with a cocky grin and a shiny new rifle, stepped forward. He dropped his weapon at Rachel's feet, letting it clatter against the dirt. "Oops," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Pick that up for me, nurse." A few guys snickered. One called out, "Yes, sweetheart. You're in the wrong place. Supply tent's that way." Another voice sharper cut through. "Who let her on the field? She's going to get hurt." A new voice joined in, this one from a stocky lieutenant named Carter, his face flushed with too much confidence and not enough sense. He leaned against a crate, arms crossed, his smirk wide enough to show teeth. "What's with the outfit, kid? You raid a thrift store before showing up?" The laughter spread sharp and mean like a pack of dogs catching a scent. Carter stepped closer, his boots soughing the dirt, and pointed at her faded jacket. "You're embarrassing yourself, standing here like you belong. Go back to wherever you crawled out of." Rachel's fingers tightened on her bag strap just for a second, then relaxed. She looked at him, her eyes steady, and said, "I'm here to train, not to impress you." Carter's smirk froze, and the crowd's laughter died in their throats. Rachel didn't flinch. She looked down at the rifle, then back at the recruit. Her eyes didn't waver, but she didn't bend to pick it up either. She stepped over it slow and deliberate, like it wasn't even there. The recruit's grin faltered. Another soldier, taller with a face like he was born to give orders, blocked her path. "You got permission to be here or you just lost?" His tone wasn't curious, it was a challenge. Rachel tilted her head slightly, just enough to meet his gaze. "I'm exactly where I need to be," she said, her voice low, steady like she was stating a fact. The guy blinked, caught off guard, but before he could snap back, a whistle blew. The drill started. Reflex test. They called it simple enough. React to an attack, show your instincts. Sergeant Walker, still stinging from his fall, volunteered to lead it. He circled Rachel, his boots kicking up dust. His eyes locked on her like she was prey. "Let's see what you got," he muttered loud enough for the crowd to hear her. He swung an elbow back fast, aiming for her shoulder. It was supposed to be a test, but it felt personal. The crowd leaned in, expecting her to stumble. She didn't. Rachel pivoted smooth as water, caught his wrist with 2 fingers and twisted. Walker hit the ground hard, his knees cracking against the dirt. 3 seconds, maybe less. "With your permission," she said, her voice shrill but clear, "I'd like to complete my session." The field went quiet. Not a single laugh now. A corporal named Evans, lean and sharp-eyed, with a habit of chewing gum like it was a personality trait, stepped out from the crowd. He blew a bubble, popped it loud, and grinned. "You think that little trick makes you somebody? This ain't a dance studio, princess." He tossed his cap onto the ground near her feet, daring her to react. The other soldiers watched, some nudging each other, waiting for the show. Rachel glanced at the cap, then back at Evans. Her face didn't change, but she bent down, picked up the cap, and dusted it off. She handed it back to him, her movement slow, deliberate. "Keep this," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "You'll need it when you're sent home." Evans's grin vanished, and a murmur rippled through the crowd. Nobody had expected her to turn his game against him. Colonel Briggs stormed across the field, his boots pounding the earth like he was trying to break it. He was a big man, late 40s, with a face carved from years of yelling at people. His uniform was crisp metals, pinned tight, and he carried himself like he owned every inch of Redstone Delta. He stopped in front of Rachel, looking her up and down like she was a smudge on his boot. "Who are you to lay hands on my officer?" he barked. The crowd shifted, some nodding, others smirking. Briggs didn't wait for an answer. Give me your file. You're not on the roster. Rachel reached into her bag, pulled out a thin folder and handed it over. Her movements were calm, precise, like she had done this 100 times. Briggs snatched it, flipped it open and scoffed. Summoned from the Pentagon. He tossed the file into the dirt. I don't take orders from some nameless legend. A senior officer, Captain Hayes, stepped forward. He was older, quieter, with gray at his temples and a habit of watching more than he spoke. He bent down, picked up the file and dusted it off. His fingers lingered on the ID number printed on the cover. Rev 9. He froze for a split second, his eyes narrowing. He ran the code through a handheld scanner, and the screen blinked red. A sealed record classified. Hayes looked at Rachel, then back at the screen. The file linked to a mission 7 years ago. A Black Ops job that went south. Only one survivor. The name Raven 9 was tied to it. A ghost story whispered among the brass. Briggs left cold and sharp. I don't answer to ghosts, he said, waving a hand like he could dismiss her. Rachel just stood there, her hands loose at her sides, her eyes steady. In the mess hall later that day, the air was thick with whispers. A group of soldiers sat at a corner table, their trays untouched, their eyes darting to Rachel as she walked in. One of them, a weary private named Lopez, with a tattoo crawling up his neck, leaned forward and hissed, "She's got to be a plant. Nobody's that good without a reason." He raised his voice loud enough for her to hear. "Hey, no name. What's your deal? You sleeping with someone at the Pentagon to get in here?" The room went quiet, forks pausing midair. Rachel set her tray down at an empty table, her movements low, deliberate. She looked at Lopez, her eyes sharp enough to cut glass. "Say that again," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. Lopez opened his mouth, then closed it. The silence stretched and he looked away, his face burning. The tension on the field was thick like the air before a storm. Briggs wasn't done. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a growl. "Leave my camp or I'll drag you out by the collar." Rachel didn't move, didn't blink. The crowd watched, waiting for her to back down. She didn't. Briggs raised his hand, his fingers twitching like he was about to slap her. "Did you hear me? No name?" he said, his voice loud enough to echo. The moment his hand grazed her cheek, Rachel moved. Not fast, not flashy, just efficient. She caught his wrist, twisted it back, and a sickening crack split the air. Briggs stumbled, his face white, his arm limp. The 317 soldiers around them froze. Nobody breathed. Rachel let go, stepped back, and adjusted her sleeve again like nothing had happened. Lieutenant Colonel Reynolds pushed through the crowd. He was head of Redstone's strategy division, a man with a reputation for knowing more than he ever said. His face was pale, his eyes locked on Rachel like he'd seen a ghost. He stopped a few feet away, his hands shaking slightly. "We thought you were gone," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Rachel nodded, just a slight dip of her chin. "I'm still here," she said, "and I came back because you burned down my entire unit." Reynolds swallowed hard, then turned to the troops. His voice was steady now, commanding. "This is the only person to ever beat the Delta Ops campaign exam. Kneel and salute the special commander." A few soldiers dropped to one knee, hesitant. Others just stared, their jaws tight. During a late-night briefing, the room was dimly lit, the air heavy with cigarette smoke and tension. A major named Thompson, broad-shouldered and always itching for a fight, stood at the front, pointing at a map. He glanced at Rachel, who sat quietly in the back, her hands folded. "You got any input or you just here to look pretty?" he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The other officers chuckled, their eyes flicking to her. Rachel stood, walked to the map, and pointed to a choke point nobody had mentioned. "You're leaving this flank open. Fix it or you're dead in 10 minutes. Thompson's face cringed, but he didn't argue. The room went quiet, and for the first time, a few officers nodded their pens, scratching notes. The auditorium was packed, the air buzzing with disbelief. A group of trainees stood up, their faces twisted with anger. One of them, a stocky guy with a buzzcut and a chip on his shoulder, pointed at Rachel. "Why should we salute an outsider?" he shouted. Another lanky with a voice that carried too much confidence chimed in. "We've trained for 12 months. What has she done?" The room murmured, some nodding, others crossing their arms. Rachel didn't react. She walked to the tactical board at the front of the room. Her steps slow, deliberate. She picked up a piece of chalk, her fingers steady. "Give me an emergency assault directive," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. The room went quiet again. Nobody expected what came next. In the early dawn before the auditorium scene, a grizzled sergeant named Malone, with a face like weathered leather and a voice rough from years of shouting, spotted Rachel near the armory. He was the kind who thrived on intimidating new recruits, and he sauntered over, his hands on his hips. "You lost, little girl. This ain't a place for tourists." He gestured at her plain uniform, his lip curling. "What, you think you're one of us? Go play soldier somewhere else." The other soldiers nearby smirked, waiting for her to shrink. Rachel didn't. She picked up a nearby training grenade, tossed it lightly in her hand, and lobbed it with precision into a target 50 yards away. Dead center. Malone's jaw dropped, his cigarette falling to the ground. "Keep practicing," she said, walking away, her voice calm but sharp enough to sting. The scenario flashed on the screen, a base surrounded on 3 sides. Enemy forces closing in, limited resources, 30 minutes to plan a defense. Rachel didn't hesitate. She drew 4 lines on the board, each one representing a unit. Her hands moved fast, precise, like she was solving a puzzle she'd seen before. Defense established, assault planned, logistics locked in. She stepped back, dropped the chalk, and turned to face the room. 41 seconds. The clock stopped at 41 seconds. Reynolds shot to his feet, his chair scraping the floor. "She's not a candidate," he said, his voice shaking with something close to awe. "She once advised presidential-level operations." The room was silent, but the air felt different now, heavier, like the truth was starting to sink in. Outside the auditorium, a small group of soldiers lingered, their voices low, but sharp. One of them, a weary specialist named Jenkins, with a habit of talking too fast, spotted Rachel walking by. He called out, "Hey, hotshot, you think you're better than us? Prove it in the mud?" He gestured to the obstacle course, slick with rain from the night before. The others jeered, egging her on. Rachel paused, her boots sinking slightly into the ground. She looked at the course, then back at Jenkins. Without a word, she walked to the starting line, dropped her bag and ran. She cleared the walls, the ropes, the barbed wire, her movements fluid, relentless. She finished in half the time of the camp's record. Jenkins stood there, his mouth open, the mud dripping from his own failed attempt earlier that day. Rachel stood at the center of the training field again, surrounded by 5 soldiers from Alpha Viper. They were big, all of them, with the kind of swagger that comes from too many gym hours and not enough doubt. They had organized a 5-on-1 endurance trial. No weapons, just fists and egos. One of them, a broad-shouldered guy with a scar across his knuckles, sneered, "You're all talk. Let's see you fight." Rachel didn't answer. She slipped off her gloves, tucked them into her pocket, and bent her knees slightly, her body loose but ready. The leader counted down, 3, 2, 1, go. The first guy lunged, aiming a fist at her jaw. Rachel sidestepped her knee, snapping up to catch him under the chin. He dropped out cold. The second soldier came at her from the side, his arm swinging wide. Rachel ducked, grabbed his elbow, and yanked. His shoulder popped, and he hit the ground groaning. The third tried a hook yield, his arms wrapping around her neck. She twisted, locked his arm in a hold nobody in the camp had ever seen, and he was out in seconds, his face red and gasping. The last 2 charged together, thinking numbers would win. Rachel pivoted, using their momentum against them, and flipped them both onto their backs in one smooth motion. 9 seconds. The whole thing took 9 seconds. The camp stood froze in the air, thick with dust and silence. A trainer standing off to the side whispered to another, "Raven 9 is really back." In the command tent the next morning, a clerk was sorting through personnel files when he stopped at Rachel's. His hand shook as he read the name again, at 9. He looked up, catching the eye of a passing officer, a quiet man named Daniels, who'd been at Redstone for years. Daniels took the file, his brow furrowing. "This can't be right," he muttered, flipping through the pages. A single photo slipped out, an old one, grainy, showing a young woman in tactical gear, her face half covered in ash. Daniel stared at it, then at Rachel, who was outside adjusting her bag. He didn't say anything, but he tucked the photo into his pocket and walked away, his steps quicker than usual. The aftermath wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't need to be. Sergeant Walker, the one who'd called her a bunny, was quietly reassigned the next day. Nobody said why, but the orders came from higher up than Redstone. The recruit who dropped his rifle at her feet. His name showed up on a leaked video online, one that caught him mocking a civilian during leave. His sponsorship deal with a tactical gear company vanished overnight. Colonel Briggs, with his arm in a sling, tried to save face at a staff meeting, but his voice shook when he spoke. A week later, he was out. His desk cleared, his nameplate gone. The lanky trainee who'd refused to salute, his unit dropped him from the elite selection pool. No explanation, just a memo. Reality was catching up, one piece at a time. At the camp's weekly debrief, a captain named Harris, all sharp jawline and sharper ambition, stood up to challenge Reynolds' orders. He pointed at Rachel, who sat quietly at the edge of the room, her hands resting on her knees. "This is a joke, right? We're supposed to follow her. She looks like she's here to clean the barracks." The room tensed, waiting for a reaction. Rachel didn't move, but her eyes flicked to Harris. Holding his gaze for just a moment, she stood, walked to the front, and picked up a marker. Without a word, she sketched a supply chain flaw in their last drill, one nobody had noticed. Harris sat down, his face pale as Reynolds nodded. "Fix it," he said, pointing at Harris. "She just saved your team." Rachel didn't stay to watch it all unfold. She didn't need to. She walked through the camp, her bag slung over one shoulder, her steps as steady as they'd been that first morning. Nobody stopped her now. Nobody laughed. A few soldiers nodded as she passed, their eyes dropping to the ground. Others just watched, their faces unreadable. She didn't say goodbye, didn't make a speech. She just kept moving, her silhouette small against the horizon, her hair catching the wind. The camp felt quieter without her, like something vital had left with her. but the truth lingered heavy and undeniable in every corner of Redstone Delta. Years ago, Rachel had stood in a different field, not unlike this one. The memory came back unbidden as she passed an old Humvee parked near the gate. It was rusted like the one her unit had used on that mission 7 years ago. She'd been 18, barely out of training when they sent her team into the dark. Raven 9, they called her, because she was the 9th operative. The youngest, the one nobody expected to make it out. The explosion had been deafening, the heat swallowing everything. She'd crawled through the wreckage, her hands bloody, her ears ringing, until she found the only other survivor. A kid who didn't make it through the night. She'd carried his tags back, handed them over, and walked away. Nobody had asked her to stay. Nobody had asked her name. As she passed the gate, a young private no older than 19 stood guard. His hands were sweaty on his rifle, his eyes darting to Rachel as she approached. He'd heard the stories, the whispers about Raven 9. He stepped forward, his voice cracking. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say what you did out there. It's why I signed up." Rachel paused, her hand resting on the gate. She didn't turn, but her shoulders softened just a fraction. "Stay sharp," she said, her voice low, almost kind. The private nodded, his chest swelling, and watched as she walked through the gate, the dust settling behind her. Back then, she had learned to move quietly, to let her actions speak. Her family had wanted her to take a different path. Boardrooms, galas, the kind of life where power came with a last name. The Moores were giants, their name on buildings, their influence in every corner of the country. But Rachel had chosen this instead. No insignia, no fanfare, just a faded uniform and a job nobody else wanted. She had learned to take the insults, the laughs, the sideways looks. Not because she liked it, but because she knew who she was. And she knew what she could do. Every step she took carried that weight, even when nobody else saw it. The day she left Redstone, something shifted. A young officer, one of the few who saluted her without hesitation, caught her at the gate. He was nervous, his hands fidgeting with his cap. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low, "I just wanted to say what you did back there. It changed things for a lot of us." Rachel paused, her hand on the strap of her bag. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened just for a moment. "Keep training," she said. "You'll need it." He nodded, stepping back. And she walked on. The gate closed behind her, the sound sharp in the quiet morning. She didn't look back. Hours later, a black SUV rolled into the camp. The man who stepped out was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that didn't invite conversation. He wore no uniform, just a plain jacket and boots. But the way he moved said he didn't need rank to command a room. The soldiers straightened when he passed their conversations, dying mid-sentence. He didn't speak, didn't ask questions. He just walked to the command tent where Reynolds was waiting. The trainer who whispered about Raven 9 saw him and froze his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. Nobody said his name. They didn't need to. His presence was enough. The camp knew who he was to her, and they knew what it meant. During a quiet moment in the tent, Reynolds pulled out a small box from his desk. Inside was a single medal, tarnished but heavy, engraved with a date from 7 years ago. He handed it to the man, his voice low. "She left this behind. But you should have it." The man took it, his fingers brushing the metal, his jaw tight. He didn't say anything, just nodded and slipped the medal into his pocket. The air in the tent felt heavy, like it was holding onto something unspoken. Reynolds looked away, his hands clasped tight as the man turned and left. Rachel's husband didn't stay long. He spoke to Reynolds for less than 10 minutes. His voice low, his words clipped. When he left, Reynolds looked like he'd aged a decade. The orders that came down later that day were clear. Alpha Viper was to be restructured, new leadership and new priorities. The soldiers who challenged Rachel were reassigned to desk jobs. Their careers stalled before they could start. The ones who'd stayed quiet, who'd watched and learned, were moved up. The camp buzzed with whispers, but nobody dared say her name out loud. Not anymore. Raven 9 wasn't just a ghost story now, she was real. And she'd walked among them. The consequences kept coming, quiet but relentless. The recruit with the sponsorship deal tried to post an apology online, but it was too late. His comments section filled with screenshots of his behavior shared by someone who'd been at Redstone. The gear company issued a statement cutting ties. The stocky trainee who'd refused to salute. His name showed up in a report about conduct violations, and his unit stopped inviting him to drinks. Briggs, the colonel with the broken wrist, applied for a transfer, but nobody wanted him. His reputation followed him, a shadow he couldn't shake. It wasn't revenge, it was just the truth catching up one piece at a time. On her last night at Redstone, Rachel had stood alone by the training field. The stars sharp overhead, a faint breeze carried the smell of diesel and dust. She pulled a small, worn photo from her pocket. A group of soldiers, her old unit smiling in better days. Her fingers traced the edges, lingering on a face that wasn't there anymore. She tucked the photo away, her jaw tight, and walked back to her bunk. The camp was silent, but the weight of her presence lingered like a mark nobody could erase. Before she left, Rachel was called to a small office near the camp's edge, where a logistics officer named Carter, no relation to the lieutenant, sat behind a cluttered desk. He was a nervous type, always adjusting his glasses, and he barely looked up as she entered. "You're more right. Sign this. It's just protocol," he said, sliding a form across the desk. His tone was dismissive, like she was just another name on a list. Rachel took the pen, but her eyes caught a faded patch on his desk, a logo from her old unit, one she hadn't seen in years. She paused, her hand hovering over the paper, then signed her name in a single sharp stroke. Carter glanced at the signature, his glasses slipping down his nose. He froze, his fingers trembling as he read more of 9. He stammered, You're her." Rachel just nodded, set the pen down, and walked out, leaving him staring at the paper like it was a bomb. Rachel didn't see any of it. She was already gone, driving down a back road in a beat-up truck, her bag in the passenger seat. The radio played something soft, an old country song her dad used to hum when she was a kid. She didn't sing along, but her fingers tapped the wheel just once, like she was keeping time. The road stretched out endless and open, and she kept driving. No destination, no rush, just her, the hum of the engine, and the weight of everything she'd carried for years. She didn't need to prove anything now. The proof was back there in the silence she had left behind. For everyone watching, everyone who's ever been looked down on, judged, or pushed aside, this one's for you. You know what it feels like to stand in a room where nobody sees you. You know the sting of words that cut deeper than they should. You weren't wrong for staying quiet. You weren't alone in holding your ground. And you're still here carrying your truth just like she did. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.